Welcome to all vintage watch enthusiasts. Today I'm addressing in particular those who are just getting into this world. Those who may own one or more timepieces or intend to buy one, but don't yet have a full awareness of what a vintage watch can conceal. Let's talk about an important, but often overlooked issue: watches that contain radioactivity, particularly radium-226. If you're watching this video, you're likely interested in the beauty and history of vintage watches, but you may not be fully aware of the risks associated with certain materials used in the past. Today, I want to offer you a practical guide on how to recognize watches containing radium, both when buying them online or at flea markets, and if you own them unknowingly in your collection. My personal experience has allowed me to delve into this topic, which is certainly improvable. In fact, I urge you in the comments to take notes if you have doubts or want to make observations or corrections. However, I believe it's important to have basic knowledge of this aspect of last century's watches. We know how easy it is to be enchanted by a vintage dial or design without thinking about what lies behind the exterior appearance. That's why it's so important to be informed and aware, because a watch should be a treasure to admire, not a source of concern for your health. So, if you're ready to discover how to protect yourself and your collection from radioactive watches, I invite you to keep watching as we explore this fascinating and crucial topic together. In the past, when there wasn't much electric light, watches were needed that could be seen even in the dark. Watches glowed thanks to luminescent substances called lume. This was the main method used to make watches visible in the dark for much of the 20th century, from the beginning of the century until around the mid-1960s, when it was definitively abandoned for tritium, which was less dangerous. It works like this. Inside the watch, on the hands or on the dial, a luminescent substance containing a radioactive material, radium-226, called a radionuclide, and a scintillator was applied. When the radionuclide decays, it emits energy in the form of radiation. This energy is then captured by the scintillator, which converts it into visible light, making the watch glow. A famous example of this technology was the radiomere patented by Guido Panerai, where the energy produced by the radioactive decay of radium bromide stimulated zinc sulfide, causing the watch to glow with its own light even in low light conditions or total darkness. After several years, the scintillator is completely burned by the isotope and therefore loses its luminescence. This leads to the mistake of assuming for the inexperienced that it either doesn't contain radium or that it's no longer radioactive. Nothing could be further from the truth. The radioactivity of radium-226 has a half-life of 1600 years, so the isotope is still at its peak radioactivity. Watches were perhaps relatively safe for those who wore them because the radiation emitted by radium into the air only extended a few centimeters and was contained by the watch case itself, which was beautiful, new, and intact. Throughout my research over the years, I've heard and read conflicting opinions on the dangers or lack thereof of owning radium watches among collectors. Certainly, it's not up to me to give a judgment, but as I've already mentioned, I simply want to make you aware, if you're not already, of what you're dealing with. That being said, I believe I can affirm that watches with radium-luminescent paste remain dangerous, especially if opened and coming into contact with the powder of the paste, which, after many years, has likely begun to disintegrate. Additionally, the decay of radium-226 generates a gas, radon, which is colorless and odorless, and, like radium, is carcinogenic. So, if you have watches with confirmed presence of radium, perhaps with glass that shows breakages, replace it as soon as possible. For this reason, I would like to point out that the birthplace of modern watchmaking, Switzerland, has regulated the handling of radium watches and requires a license if you own more than one timepiece. If you want to delve deeper, search on the website of the Swiss Confederation, Federal Office of Public Health, Radiation Protection Division. The problem is therefore real and felt in the environment even in Italy, as evidenced by the fact that the Panerai radiomere watches from the 1930s displayed in the Manufacturers' Museum in Florence required decontamination before they could be exhibited. Obviously, this luminescent system was employed by all watchmakers in those years, both for the production of pocket watches, wristwatches, alarm clocks, military pointers, navigation instruments, and other devices, because the danger was completely ignored, to the point of using radium even as a panacea. There was a very famous drink called Radithor based on radium-226 and radium-228 that promised beneficial effects to those who used it. One of the most assiduous consumers was the American golfer Eben Byers, who paid a high price for this use. He was buried in a lead-lined coffin. However, I'll spare you his dramatic story, which you can find online if you want. How to recognize a radium watch, empirical method. As we mentioned, the scintillator is completely burned by the isotope, which results in a coloration of the radium paste ranging from yellow to ochre, let's say with a rust-like effect. It should be emphasized that the color of the luminous paste and how it ages depends on various factors, but they are all related to the scintillating substance and not the isotope. It's the scintillating substance that is luminous, colored, and changes color as it deteriorates. Additionally, each watch is different from the others in terms of the ratio of isotopes to scintillator and the type of scintillator used, so we have watches that are highly radioactive and less radioactive. It's not a method that provides mathematical certainty, but it can sound a first alarm bell. Usually, the paste was applied on the hands, on the numbers, or on the scale with small, sometimes very small dots corresponding to the minutes or at 5-minute intervals. In the latter case, sometimes they're so small that it's quite difficult to spot them with the naked eye. Ultraviolet rays. Another, more reliable method is to use a UV torch, as ultraviolet light can reactivate the luminescence of radium paste, allowing you to determine with very little margin of error whether you're facing a radioactive watch. Clearly, ultraviolet rays also activate tritium, luminova, and superluminova paste. Tritium, compared to radium, has a much shorter decay time and generally is much less dangerous. In almost all watches treated with this element, the dials are marked with a T before Swiss made or a T25, always at 6 o'clock. This element was used from around 1957 until 1998. For luminova and superluminova, these are present in modern watches and are harmless. So, in this case too, we have an alarm bell, which is accentuated if you have in your hands a watch from the 60s, 50s, or older. If the luminescence activates, as you can see in the experiment I conducted, and the watch is from the era I mentioned earlier, then we have almost certainty that we are in the presence of radium. Geiger counter. If we want to dispel any doubt, it's necessary to use a Geiger counter. Today, unlike a few years ago, they are easily available on the internet and have an affordable cost, in the range of a few tens of euros. Therefore, I recommend buying one if you deal with this type of watches. However, it's important to note that these counters don't have the same sensitivity as professional devices, and sometimes can be quite deaf, thus providing an approximate reading of real emissions. However, for a collector, it's not essential that such instruments be extremely precise or that they provide readings of the type of radiation emitted. What we're interested in knowing is if there are ionizing emissions, and in this sense, these inexpensive instruments perform their task excellently. Advice. If you have one or more of these watches at home, wear them and store them carefully. Don't wear them for long periods. Store them away from environments or rooms usually frequented, especially by children. Don't sleep with the watch on your wrist or placed on the nightstand next to the bed. In short, enjoy them. Yes, but with awareness. I hope the video has been helpful and encourages you to study this aspect of vintage watchmaking. Although it's another story, I leave you with an excerpt from the interview that was conducted with the girls who painted the radium dials. If you want, watch the movie made in 2018 about this story titled Radium Girls. See you next time!
I worked in the biggest room because there were over 100 girls worked in that. And that's how you was taught every day. We never got time to talk. You were too busy to work. Because you wanted to do it good because you knew that you wouldn't pass. See, they'd let you do it about 6 weeks. And if you wasn't any good, you were dismissed. And the bosses worked downstairs a lot of time. So we just figured, well, we got a little radium left in our jars. They're going to be well cleaned out. We got to get new for starting after lunch, so we take a sneak. So we start clowning around, go in the dark room. Paint our faces up and put mustaches, and a couple of girls painted their ears, and I always did paint, by my nostrils here, and done my eyebrows, and done a mustache and a chin. And she was my best friend, and she was a good worker too. And then before I knew it, she got sick and she had the broken jawbone. It never healed. In 2 years, she was dead.